Hey, what up seekers? Welcome back. This week we are diving into a series beginning to explain key concepts of mysticism. And the first concept is going to be pantheism. If you're new to this channel and would like to join our community of seekers exploring philosophical mysticism together, make sure to say hi and introduce yourself down in the comments, and most importantly to subscribe so you know when we put out new videos. Pantheism is a radical, dangerous, and seductive belief. A belief born from the feeling of awe and wonder that reality itself inspires. From an experience of dissolving of boundaries and melting of the ego, a mystical union between the human, the world, and God. It is the belief that pan, everything or all in Greek, is theos, God, also in Greek. Pantheism asserts that everything is God and God is everything. That the world is either identical with God or is in some way a self-expression of divine nature. According to the Encyclopedia of Philosophy, most formulations of pantheism essentially involve two assertions: that everything that exists constitutes a unity, and that this inclusive unity is in some sense divine. In most orthodox formulations of religion, God is seen as other than both oneself and the world, as transcendent and removed from the ordinary. Mystics and philosophers throughout history, often unfortunately at their own peril, have fought to undermine this view, knowing from intimate first-hand experience that God is not some reverential object somewhere far beyond the clouds, but that God is immanent and close, closer than one's own heart. The implications that such a fierce reconceptualizations of the divine had on religion and society were Copernican in magnitude, and we are still feeling its wakes today. In this series, we shall explore the belief, the different variations and expressions of pantheism, the ways it has been formulated across history by different traditions, religions, old and new. We'll look at some related concepts such as panentheism, pandeism, panpsychism, acosmism, and monism, the religious and philosophical arguments made for pantheism, the objections raised against it, and we will look at responses to such objections, the quandaries pantheism has given rise to, and most importantly, what pantheism might mean for us today and for the future of humanity. Pantheism finds expression in religion, literature, and philosophy. Its primary expression is in religion, in Hinduism, in forms of Buddhism, in Taoism, indigenous native traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and others. In philosophy, all the way from the ancient Indians to the ancient Greeks, in Stoicism, in Neoplatonism, in the works of Meister Eckhart, Nicholas of Cusa, Giordano Bruno, Jacob Boehme, Baruch Spinoza, Hegel, Schelling, Fichte, Thoreau, and Whitehead. If you're not familiar with these names, don't worry, as we go along, we will introduce you to these great thinkers. And in literature, in the likes of Goethe, Coleridge, Wordsworth, Whitman, D.H. Lawrence, and Ralph Waldo Emerson. The key religious sentiment of pantheism is its intimacy with the divine, as opposed to classic theism's distant, distinct, alienated, removed divinity. Pantheism proposes an indwelling, intimate, and close God. Really, God in everything. There is no more intimate and intimate expression of God. Classic theism holds tenaciously onto the transcendence of God, his, yes, usually a patriarchal, existence over and beyond the universe. This classic position is inherently dualistic, conceiving God as fundamentally separate from the world and from the self. And as H.P. Owens writes, although pantheists differ among themselves on many points, they all agree in denying the basic theistic claim that God and the world are ontologically distinct from one another. Pantheism, when contrasted with theism, is a strong motion in the direction of unity, reuniting God and world, divinity and humanity. You might now see why we were talking about this here at Seekers of Unity. Another element that distinguishes pantheism from theism in religion is that pantheists, not always but usually, deny an anthropomorphic personal God, which means that they deny that God has a mind which shares the characteristic personalities of personhood that we have, such as personality, preference, decision-making, agency, and things of that nature. For reasons you might begin to suspect, pantheism became quite a dangerous belief to hold when Christianity was enforced as the state religion of the Roman Empire. And important pantheists such as Meister Eckhart were often marginalized, to say the least. Others were executed and their books suppressed, Giordano Bruno, the Renaissance astronomer, philosopher, and pantheist, was burnt alive at the stake by the church in the year 1600s, one of the first famous martyrs of science and pantheism. After the religious wars of the 16th and 17th century, and the rise of religious tolerance in Europe, pantheism was able to again express itself more openly, although even after that, the perhaps most important exponent of pantheism, Spinoza, was still excommunicated by his Jewish community in Amsterdam. Pantheism began spreading with earnest in Germany in the late 18th century, with figures such as Lessing, Goethe, Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel, and in Britain it flowered in the Romantic poets Wordsworth, Keats, and Schelling, and in North America both in Transcendentalism with the much-beloved characters of Emerson and Thoreau. During the 19th century, pantheism seemed on path to becoming a widespread popular religious philosophy, worthy and threatening enough for the Vatican to condemn it as heretical in 1864. However, pantheism fell out of vogue when public intellectual attention was diverted by 2 world wars and the dominant philosophical responses of existentialism and postmodernism, and theologians grappling with issues of theodicy, the problem of evil, and death of God theologies, and with the ideological battles that were raged between communism, fascism, and democracy. Yet, pantheism persisted, often finding voice among the most eminent writers and scientists, including people like Einstein, Hawking, and Carl Sagan, authors and poets like D.H. Lawrence, Robertson Jeffers, and Frank Lloyd Wright, and the philosophers Alfred North Whitehead and Charles Hartshorne, and continues to be popularized by the likes of Alan Watts, Terence McKenna, Carl Jung, Matthew Fox, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Now, while the idea of pantheism is really, really old, dating back as far as human speculation, as far back as the earliest Greek philosophers Thales and Heraclides, the Taoist Zhuang Tzu, the Stoic Zeno, and the Upanishads and the Tao Te Ching, the term pantheism itself is a relatively modern one, first appearing in the writings of the English mathematician of Jewish-Irish descent, the close colleague of Sir Isaac Newton, Joseph Raphson, in 1697. He wrote in his De Spectio Reali, writing specifically about Spinoza, about pantheists who believe in, quote, a certain universal substance, material as well as intelligent, that fashions all things that exist out of its own essence. Raphson's thinking, in addition to showing influence from his fellow Cambridge Platonist Henry Moore, also seems to have been influenced by Jewish mysticism in the form of Kabbalah. The Kabbalistic mystical readings of Jewish scriptures, as containing secrets within words, letters, and numbers, were congenial to Raphson's mathematical mind. And the Kabbalistic metaphysical notions of a certain oneness and unity between God, the world, and humanity, ideas which also were influential upon Baruch Spinoza, the Dutch Jewish philosopher that Raphson was writing about, seems to have influenced Raphson's own writing. Raphson in his work also discusses the idea of infinity, distinguishing between potential infinity and actual infinity, a distinction which we shall see plays a very important role in the philosophical and metaphysical discussion of pantheism, particularly at the hands of the German idealists, men like Fichte, Schelling, and most specifically Hegel. In his discussion of pantheism, or pantheismus as he calls it in Latin, Raphson makes mention of pantheistic ideas he found in the thoughts of ancient Egypt, Persia, Syria, Assyria, Greek, Indian, Kabbalah, and then in Spinoza. Aside for translations of Raphson's work, the word was first used in English for the first time and popularized by the Irish philosopher John Toland in 1705. Toland himself was also influenced by Spinoza, the perhaps most important Western pantheist, and Giordano Bruno, the martyr of the Renaissance that we spoke about, and he had read Raphson's work. I would like to close with a quote and a poem, if you will give me the honors. Putting aside the slightly dated stereotyping, George Henry Lewes in 1846 wrote quite nicely that pantheism is as old as philosophy. It was taught in the old Greek schools by Plato and by St. Augustine and by the Jews. Indeed, one may say that pantheism, under one of its various shapes, is the necessary consequence of all metaphysical inquiry when pushed to its logical limits. And from this reason do we find it in every age and nation. The dreamy contemplative Indian, the the quick versatile Greek, the practical Roman, the quibbling scholastic, the ardent Italian, the lively Frenchman, and the bold Englishman have all pronounced it as the final truth of philosophy. And, in the words of poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning, earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush aflame with God. But only they who see take off their shoes. The rest stand around and pluck blackberries. Thank you for watching. In next video, we're going to explore the history of pantheism, getting way more into depth than what we covered today in a survey, both East and West, ancient and modern. Please press the bell to get notified when that video comes out. And, as always, thank you for watching and keep seeking.